What is the sign that you are good at role-playing in a tabletop role-playing game? It's when you can play the gaming session without asking unnecessary questions. Like asking for information that your character could not gain just by asking. Like, who's in that house? Well, the only way to know is to have your character go in the house and find out who's in there. Or knock on the door. Ask questions. But you can't just, look to the sky and say, who's in that house? If you can't see inside, you have to go find out. If the game master is telling you who's in that house and there's no way for you to know, you're not failing. The game master is failing you. So, if the game master is doing a good job and you have a good role player, well, there shouldn't be no unnecessary questions being asked between the game master and player. It should just be role play, and the game master is not in a situation where he is feeding information to the player that their character wouldn't know. Here is another type of unnecessary question, something a player should not be asking of the game master. Hey, game master, you just told me about that fence over there. I want to have my character run over and jump over that fence. Can I do it? Well, the game master, if they're doing their job right, should look at their player and say, who knows? You want to find out? Do you want to try? And then it's really on the player to have their character go try to jump over the fence. No player should ever ask a question of a game master trying to get information that their character can't know. How can he know if he can jump over the fence or do whatever you want him to do unless the character goes and tries to jump over the fence? Like, it's not a video game that you're playing, so you just have to take a chance, take a risk, try something. You can't be asking the game master if you can achieve anything. A good game master would never answer that question. They would go stone face on you, right? They would go poker face. They wouldn't give you an answer. They wouldn't respond. If you are a new player, do you have to worry about any of this? Not really. Do you have to learn how to roleplay before you try to roleplay? No. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down, and it's okay if you have a bad habit of trying to pry for information that you shouldn't. That makes no sense, right? Maybe you're used to playing video games, and you're asking for information about what's going to happen next. And here you are sitting at a tabletop role-playing game, and you're playing, and you're asking, the dungeon master, the game master, for information that your character wouldn't know. And you think, well, what, are you doing a bad job? No. You can play whatever way you want. Here's what's going to happen if you run into a game master that is doing their job and doing it correctly. Well, they won't reply to any of the questions that you're asking. You'll keep hitting a dead end. You'll keep hitting a wall, right? There's no information for you to gather. And they're going to keep cutting you off until you realize that's not going to work for you. It's going to force you to not ask these questions because you keep asking and you get no response. So naturally, you'll go away from that because realistically, you want to do what gets you ahead with your character. What is best for the character? What is best for the gameplay? What is best for you achieving what you want in the game? Well, if you keep hitting a wall every time you ask an unnecessary question, you'll stop. That should just be a habit that gets formed. Like, you'll stop asking these dumb questions. So you really don't have to learn this stuff. You just need to run into a game master that knows what they're doing. And by the end run with them, when you leave their game, to know it's a good game master is when you go to the next game master's game, you now know how to roleplay. If you leave a game master's game and you're still asking unnecessary questions, that game master dropped the ball. Probably not the player. Because why would the player still have those habits unless the game master was feeding those unnecessary questions? Game master, don't feed unnecessary questions. If you simply don't reply to the stuff, or at least don't give the information they're looking for, players will stop. And they'll start more properly role-playing, the gaming session. And that's good. And when that player leaves your table and goes to the next table, lucky for that game master is they're going to get a player that already knows how to role play because you did your job right. And that's it. That's how role playing is pretty much taught. It's not really taught. It's just, here, you got to do the role playing part to get anywhere. And if you keep asking unnecessary questions, you'll get nowhere. And the player doesn't need to read a book to learn how to role play, doesn't need to go through all this nonsense at all. The game master simply has to do their job right, and role play will develop from that. That's it. Someone who is good at role playing will only ever ask questions when it's necessary. Maybe there was a miscommunication, or the player didn't hear something correctly and they need a clarification. That type of question makes sense. A good role player won't shy away from asking questions, they just don't want to ask unnecessary ones. A good player who's good at role playing will not spend much time out of character. They'll try to avoid that, and if you have a good game master, they won't allow the game to go too far out of character. If there's too much time spent out of character, the game master will be dragging players back into roleplay. They'll be like, alright, let's get back to focusing on the game. Because if they allow out of character talk to linger, that can break the flow of the game, the immersion, the good experience, what you're feeling. You could get away from that just by spending too much time talking outside of the game. And then for some, it can be hard to get back to that flow, that good feeling, that good experience. Maybe the rest of that session bombs or feels dry, or you feel a little separated from what's going on. You have a harder time running your imagination. A good game master, an experienced game master, knows that can happen. So they'll be wanting the game, to go back to role play. A good player will want that too, to get back to role play without too many questions. So whatever's going on in the game, it can go on pretty smoothly, pretty quickly, a good smooth flow where you're focusing on your imagination, you're inside of your mind, you're having a good time. We call it escapism. And you're escaping the real world, you're escaping, that out of character joking around. Well, we can do that anytime, and we do. So, you don't have to bring it to this as much because you can do that anytime. And this, what we're doing here with a tabletop role-playing game, is to escape the real world. Not to be reminded of it so much that it can, harm the experience we're having with a tabletop role-playing game session. So you don't really learn to roleplay directly by reading something. It's more like something you develop over time. Just make sure you have a game master that knows what they're doing, and if the game master does their job right, it will simply develop roleplay for you. Like, you'll develop in the roleplay section, because you'll get away from asking unnecessary questions, because you're not getting that back. That's how that happens. Roleplay, being a good role player is something you develop. It's not really something you learn just by reading something and then you get to try that at the table. Because here's the issue, even if I tell you exactly what to do, you have bad habits. You really do. You're going to bring them in from the real world. And most of us have bad habits of asking stupid questions, trying to get information that we shouldn't be trying to get. We're always scamming. A lot of people are scamming, asking stupid questions. Even if they're not the worst people in the world, it's a habit. You're trying to pry, and it makes sense. Well, where there's a lot of people doing that, a lot of people drag that habit to the table. So even if I tell you how to role play right, it's meaningless. You still have the bad habit, so you'll still be asking the question. What we need to do is get the bad habits out of you. And if I'm doing my job right, which I will as a game master, we'll get those bad habits out of you through developing, away from that, right? Towards what we want. And that's it. Again, if I give you a book or a piece of paper telling you how to role play, I've wasted your time, I'm wasting my time because the habits are there. And so we have to really get in game and get rid of the bad habits. Over the years, I've gotten a lot of compliments from other game masters who run the game for my players that leave my game, they've been in the campaign, and after that they're going to join one of their friends who just started running a game, and that game master comes over and says, man, your players are mint. Like, they role play really well, they're really focused on the game, and you can tell the difference between them and maybe some other players that don't have good habits built up. It's always a compliment. And I think any game master should want that compliment. They should want that to be real for their players. So when their players come to play in their game, new or not, by the time you leave their game, you as a player have built up better habits, you're better at role-playing, and you're better at getting away from unnecessary nonsense that makes the gaming session better for everyone overall. Keep in mind, there is no competition here. There is no best player. We're just looking for good players. And what do we mean by good players? Not that that player is better than other people. It's just that when we go to have a gaming session with a good player, the experience is going to be easier, better, it's going to be smoother, more fun, because that player is going to want to focus on their imagination and role-playing, and they've got a lot of bad habits aside. That's been pushed aside, so the gaming session overall is a lot more smooth. You're a lot more focused. For the hours you sit down to play the game and the players play their characters, you're doing that the majority of the time instead of out-of-character talk, right? Or asking silly questions, or anything like that that takes away from focusing on the game and the imagination. Alright, for now, take care.
You know what you can do? You can hit the like button. You can share the video. Oh, and there's another button you can press. That one that lets you subscribe to my channel for more content. Oh yeah, there's that bell thing. You can press that so you know when I've uploaded a new video right away.